Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of B-Sides. I'm Pastor Jon, and I'm here with my co-belligerent and partner in crime, Rusten. How you doing?
Howdy. I'm doing great. How are you doing, Pastor Jon?
Well, I thought about that question, and it's the first week of Advent that we're going into, and Christmas lights are up, and the Christmas tree is up, and we watched the first Christmas movie, so I was listening to Christmas music all day in the office, so yeah, it's a good day.
Nice.
How about you? How's the preparations coming?
It's going good. I got lights up. I kind of cheated because I get they're up all the time. So I just flick the switch and change the bulbs that are out. But it's great. We got Christmas music going too. Leftovers of Thanksgiving food.
Yes,
it's good. I'm getting excited about. We haven't done the tree yet. That's this week at some point. The tree and the house decor. We were gone all week, staying at my folks' house for Thanksgiving, so we're not at home the whole weekend. So
you leave your lights up outside all year? Is that right?
Yeah. Whenever it's party time, I just flick them on.
You just flick them on.
My house is the house with the party lights, the Christmas lights.
Do they last? Do they last outside?
1 year of having them up all year, I had 2 bulbs that needed to get changed.
Oh my gosh.
So
there's a certain curse because I do quite a few lights at my house.
Yeah.
And I put them away, dry them out every year, and I lose entire strands every year just sitting in my garden shed. And my neighbor, he left his up on his house like all year long, and like 2 bulbs went out. And I'm like, how's that work?
Bulbs go out in the boxes, or in the bins, or whatever.
There's some gremlin that lives in there.
Yes, exactly. I don't know what it is, but the previous year I didn't leave them up all year, and I thought, I actually kind of like it because I live on that road. I live on a road where it's really difficult to find my house sometimes, and so having the lights on is like, that's my house with the lights on. It's kind of handy.
Yeah.
But the previous year I did this, I had entire strands go out, multiple bulbs, had to go replace entire strands, and this year 2 bulbs. So
it's not fair. It's not fair.
Which is good. Which, given the economy, is pretty good for me right now.
Yeah. Okay, so we're doing Exodus 11 today.
Yep.
And you preached that sermon.
Yep.
And so we're
doing the last questions. We're doing the last 2 Exodus B-sides, and then we'll get to do Advent B-sides.
Are we doing Advent B-sides?
Are we? I don't know. We usually do.
I don't know.
We can decide.
Maybe we'll take a Christmas break.
Hey, maybe we will.
That wouldn't be the worst idea ever.
No, there's so much going on in Advent anyways.
Yeah. Okay, let's dive in, right? So, fantastic sermon, by the way. I love getting to hear you preach. I get a Sunday off and get to think, and then I just get to sit and listen, and I super enjoy that. And you're definitely gifted in that way. So, great job. Man. You talked on the front end about Pharaoh's madness and how it's kind of comical what's happening in the text. So I want to know, could you talk about why is Pharaoh's madness necessary? Why is it inescapable? Or first, would you agree it's an inescapable madness?
Yeah, I mean, based on the premise of rejecting God, it is an inescapable madness.
Okay, so tease that out a little bit.
Yeah, so Pharaoh, his character is revealed as what makes Pharaoh in this story is that he rejects God.
Mm-hmm.
He rejects his calls to let the people go. He rejects all the meaning behind all of the plagues. He's a character, I would say, if you had to what does he symbolically represent, if you wanted to think about it that way, would be a rejection of God. And so that rejection of God always results in madness, stupidity. That's one of the things I said. It's like rejecting God.
Right.
Rejecting God makes you stupid. Right?
I remember when you said that. That wasn't the word anybody was expecting to hear.
Rebellion against God makes you stupid.
Yeah.
Because and that's not just me saying that. That is a biblical doctrine. That's a clear teaching all over in God's word. In the Old Testament, I almost went to the direction of going down the Psalms that talk about idols, right? And
Yes.
those,
Yeah.
the idols of the nations are gold and silver. They have eyes but do not see, ears but do not hear, mouths but do not
Yep.
speak. And
Yep.
those who worship them become
Come.
like them,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So there's a similar idea in Romans 1 where you have, by rejecting, not acknowledging God, not giving thanks to him, they become futile in their
Yeah.
thinking as their foolish hearts are darkened. So
Why does that happen?
yeah,
Why does the worship of idols or the rejection of God, why does it necessarily result in just insanity, stupidity?
Yeah, and this is something I wanted to tease out more in this sermon, and I think I was able to do it because sometimes we say this, especially if you like enjoy Van Til, you're gonna say this kind of stuff more because you see this antithesis of like, rejecting God makes you stupid and it makes you like futile in your thinking. But I wanted to dig into the logic behind it, and one of the things I talked about was, well, so you don't get a choice. You're living in God's world, and it's his reality. He made things. And so necessarily, inescapably, when you reject him, you are rejecting reality. You're rejecting meaning as he's defined it. You've rejected your identity as he's defined it. And those are inescapable realities. You reject God, you are rejecting the foundation and core of your very existence. And that is what leads minds to say stupid stuff like 2 + 2 is 5, or there's a host of things we could get into. Boys can become girls, right? There's you can somehow keep borrowing against the future and never have to pay the piper. Like there's a whole bunch of things that come to play when you reject God, and they result in stupid thinking. And that's the necessity is that by rejecting God, you are rejecting the very reality wherein you have to live, think, and have your being. Thus, you result in making stupid decisions and thoughts.
Yeah, we live in God's world, and God's world works the way God designed it to work. And so water runs downhill.
Yeah.
And and if you decide to rebel against that, you're going to look really foolish.
Yeah.
And it's going to be hard on you.
What's funny is that a lot of people think that you can reject God and still live in his world, but the times are proving that it doesn't actually work out that way. Reject long enough and you reject the created order. And, we're seeing this with the sexuality stuff right now. Like, this, all the grandmas are looking at this and going, what? Like, how did they get here? It's like, oh, well, it's kind of the natural consequence of rejecting God.
Yeah. Yeah. So you have, you reject God, you have an inescapable sooner or later. It's not like you, like when it comes to the issues of gender, it's not like you reject God and all of a sudden you buy into transgender.
No.
Right.
Yeah.
But it sends you down this road of there is no God. I determine my own truth. And you just keep teasing that out over and over and over and over again. And that commitment to self is going to touch every part of reality sooner or later. And then you're going to end up, there's this hilarious point in this sermon where you talked about up until the 10th plague, Pharaoh has been defeated every single time. Moses is 9-0 and Pharaoh is 0-9, and now his life's son is on the line, and you're like, I like my chances.
The odds are in my favor.
The odds are in my favor, yeah. Sooner or later, right?
Yeah, exactly. You flip a coin enough, you're going to land on the coin, the side you want, right?
Yeah.
That's Pharaoh's madness, and that madness, it springs from that hardness of heart.
Yeah.
Right. It's not it's a madness driven by rejecting God, driven by it.
Yeah. And it goes like, if you think about, like, you drop a pedal in a pond, right? And those ripples start to go further and further out. And it's one thing if that madness just affects you as an individual.
Yeah.
But nothing really affects just you as an individual. right? Because we're made in God's image, which means we're made in community. And part of Pharaoh's madness is that he's so committed to himself that he's willing to sacrifice his son.
Yeah, which is his future, which is like
Yeah.
his the whole world in a nutshell, basically.
Yeah. I remember when you were preaching that, I was thinking, oh, there's one of those, Edmund Clowney and Tim Keller were like really good at flipping things. I mean, in a positive way, like super,
judo kind of thing, or
yes. And I kept thinking, there's something there with the Pharaoh is so committed to himself that he's willing to sacrifice his son.
Yes.
And there's an inversion of that in God, where God is so committed to himself and his promise and the people that he has elected that he is willing to sacrifice his son.
Yeah. And he'll get his son back.
But he gets his son back. That's right. That's right. And it's for goodness. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So inescapable madness. It's sooner or later you're gonna. Yeah. It's gonna come to you.
You may have seen me like jumping around the screen a little bit because I wanted to read something I just read today that was like weirdly applicable to this.
Yeah.
You know who Aldous Huxley is, right?
Yes. Yeah. So
atheist philosopher, right? Postmodern granddaddy, basically. This is what he's basically promoting a world of relativism, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like what because you have to ask the question, like, what drives this rejection of God? What drives this motivation to?
Is that Brave New World?
Yeah, he wrote Brave New World.
Okay.
But his whole philosophical kind of bent was like, basically existentialism and postmodernism, like delving into meaninglessness and just like making your own reality, which is what you're doing. You're making your own reality. It's just it's not reality.
It's not real.
Exactly. So he's explaining why. Why did he go this way? And he said this: I had motives for not wanting the world to have meaning, consequently assumed it had none, and was able without any difficulty to find satisfying reasons for this assumption. The philosopher who finds no meaning in the world is not concerned exclusively with the problem in pure metaphysics. He is also concerned to prove there is no valid reason why he, personally, should not do as he wants to. For myself, as no doubt for most of my contemporaries, the philosophy of meaninglessness was essentially an instrument of liberation. The liberation we desired was simultaneously liberation from a certain political and economic system and liberation from a certain system of morality. We objected to morality because it interfered with our sexual freedom. But basically, he's just owning it. He's like, well, I wanted the world to be meaningless, and so I made up arguments to make it meaningless because I wanted it to be meaningless, because I wanted to do what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And then he basically, but now people like look at his philosophy like, yeah, that's really compelling. It's like, of course it's compelling. It tells you can do whatever the heck you want to do.
That's right. Yeah. But the reality is that
it's destructive.
Which we see in is that you, in one sense, you can do whatever the heck you want to do for a time.
Yeah.
But sooner or later, checks bounce,
exactly.
And reality is going to come back on you
with all of its hard granite granite surface.
Yeah.
Smash, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Do you remember there's this, I don't recommend anybody going and looking this up, but there was this hilarious South Park music video about my safe space. Have you ever seen that?
I never did, no.
Oh my gosh. I don't even think I've ever seen an episode of South Park, but I know a little bit about it. But
clips are around.
Yes, clips are around, and this one of them's talking about their safe space and how, nobody can harm them, nobody can hurt their feelings. And then the villain in the song shows up, and his name is Reality.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah.
If you're brave, you can go check that out. But
yeah, but the interesting thing on the other side is that reality is like only really harmful to you if you are living outside of it, right? If you're trying to live outside of it, whereas creation is good. That's what we read in Genesis 1. It's good. It reflects God's character and his nature, and of course, there's the fallen elements of it, right? But they're, ultimately living in line with nature is living in line with that goodness. And that's real. Contrary to Huxley, that's real liberation.
Yeah. There's some, before we go on to the next thing, some parallels I thought were interesting. Just, I was thinking as you were talking, Pharaoh rejected God, right?
Yep.
But the way in which Pharaoh rejected God, I think is interesting and applicable, because it's not like God showed up and talked to Pharaoh.
Yeah.
God talked to Pharaoh through his people.
Yeah.
And when Pharaoh rejected that, Pharaoh embraced madness. And I think there's very much a parallel between the world rejecting the church, and because God's speaking through his church, not with new revelation, of course, but with just the preaching of the inspired word. And the world becomes Pharaoh. Yeah. When the world shuts down the church, right?
Yeah.
It's just madness.
Do you think there's a little bit of a allergic reaction people have to when you say stuff like that, because they don't want to put the church in any sort of like crucial position? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think I think that allergic reaction is wrong, because we're not saying that the church saves, right? But we're saying that 100% God has chosen his church to be the means by which the world will either reject or receive Christ. Yeah. Right? And that rejection
that's clear in the Old Testament, where Israel is supposed to be a light to the nations. Yep. And the New Testament language about the church being ambassadors for Christ. Yes. Yep. That Paul says the church is the pillar of truth.
Yes.
Gosh, there's another one that came to my mind. Oh, the church has the keys to the kingdom.
Yep.
Right? And so the church is God's appointed person or people that is speaking truth to the world, just like Moses spoke truth to Pharaoh. And I mean, how do you make sense of the Great Commission if the church isn't supposed to say something with some authority? Yes. Now, it's a derived authority. It's a delegated authority that comes from Christ, but it's an authority nonetheless.
Exactly.
And it's based on that authority that the church calls the world to repent. And so the world really has an option, right? You repent or you embrace madness. Yep. And again, that madness is progressive. It doesn't start with, hey, let's sexually mutilate kids and make that legal and call it justice. It doesn't start there, but it will necessarily end there, because once you start rejecting God's truth, sooner or later, you will reject all of God's truth, and you'll just be left with a lie.
Chaos.
Lies.
And it does make me kind of wonder, like, how much further can this train go without wheels and track? It's like, but God knows.
Yes, God does know.
It is very that's the logical, and I think that people are, with every generation that comes up, it becomes more and more clear, because the previous generations were skating on a little thicker ice. Yeah, because they hadn't the gospel and had permeated the West so deeply, especially in America, with great awakenings and just how common it was to have our morality shaped by this single source of God and his word. And now it's like with every generation, the next generation is like further away from that. It's just the ice is getting thinner. And it does make you wonder how thin it can get.
It makes I mean, we're speculating here and a little bit off topic, but I wonder if the backlash from detransitioning people will be the ice breaking moment. Yeah, I hope something. You gotta hope, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You gotta hope. Okay. Next thing. Okay. Both of us talked about intersectionality in our sermons. There's two texts, or one text in each one of those chapters that clearly contradicts intersectionality ideology. Yeah. and you connected it to a false gospel. So we're not going to talk about it in the next episode. So we'll pack all of it into this episode.
Right.
So could
on.
you intersectionality sounds like a really big confusing word. Could you give us like a blue collar definition? What does that word mean? What is it?
So intersectionality in terms of an actual like academic term is this idea that you have certain points, both negative and positive, as an individual based upon your group associations. So the positive points are assigned to you based on group victimhood, and the negative points are assigned to you based on whether or not you align with the hegemony, which is just like the status quo, who's been in power, etc. So in the intersectionality is where those different points cross. And so if you're, for instance, a black woman, transgender woman, a black transgender woman, you are the lowest on the victimhood scale. You're the biggest victim in this culture because you're the most marginalized. You're the most minority. You have
multiple layers of intersectionality,
multiple layers of oppression in the past based on your group associations, and so thus you are the person who has the most positive points in terms of, let's just call it, in a world that rejects the righteousness of God, that person has the righteousness of victimhood.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then on the conversely, if you are on the other side of things, you're a white Christian male. You are considered the devil incarnate.
Yeah.
in this model, like
you are the boogeyman.
You are the person that must be taken down if justice is going to happen. And remember, justice is a synonym for righteousness.
Yeah.
Right. So justice is being perverted, and so. And that's in a nutshell what intersectionality is. It's the scale of oppression groups, and you get, if you have a certain number of these categories in your group alignment, you are super special or super wicked according to the world.
Yeah. So the more oppressed or minority or underprivileged communities or categories that you belong, the higher you rank.
Exactly.
Right? You can do no wrong, special privileges, the whole thing.
Yep. Which one of my points I was making is that you are justified in this paradigm. You are justified by victimhood.
Yeah. So you end up having it ends up presenting a false gospel, right?
Yes.
What saves you is having those multiple layers of intersect. The crazy thing about that is that when it comes to issues of like what's called sexual minority, which we used to just call perverts, that being a pervert saves you.
Basically, yes.
And versus you need to be saved from being a pervert.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. It's like it's a total inversion of God's.
And that's why a lot of Christians who have imbibed this way of thinking like think it's ridiculously offensive and contrary to love to even pose the idea that a gay person could be saved from being gay.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Because that goes against their notion of the gospel, which is they almost valorize those people who are minorities, and they got to figure out some way to just change the gospel to fit that in.
Right. So so with intersectionality, you get a false gospel. It's really interesting, like the statistics. If you look at like people who identify as the spaghetti, the alphabet spaghetti thing.
Yes.
Over the last couple of years, that has exponentially exploded, and it's like it's almost like the youth camp revival that's taken place. Where
that's a good point. Yeah,
you've got 1.5%, less than 2% of people who are LGBTQ actually, right? And then now you're looking at like in 2020, 21, 22, like upwards of 20% of youth are identifying as this. but they've never even been in a relationship.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, it's people just want to identify, like, I am this, even though there's no connection with that identity in terms of their experience and reality, but it's just they want to be in on the salvation, right? You want to
Yep.
be in on the right group, and here's a way that you can get in on it. And oh, by the way, it's a lot of white people who are trying to justify themselves and make up for their privilege and their guilt.
Yeah, there becomes a motivation behind something like transgenderism for men, right? Men want to escape their masculine oppressor category, right?
Yeah.
If I can get out of this, this persona, I can leave this behind me. I can do penance to that, right? Can repent of that sin of being a man, which, and that's a lot of times what you're seeing with a lot of this stuff is that, we've been teaching boys to hate the fact that they are boys.
Yeah.
And now you have effeminate boys who reject masculinity, or you have even people going so far as transgenderism. Interestingly, you have the exact same thing happen with women, but it's not because of intersectionality. It's because of the other side of the feminist argument, which is to be a woman is actually, as God intended women or designed women, maternal and, glorious femininity. All those things are, according to the feminist lie, you're not really worth anything unless you're a man, right? It's this weird,
unless you can do what a man can do.
Exactly. And so now you have people like, well, I want to, there's weirdly two lies that are running parallel that are both feeding the transgender like desire to hate yourself and be something you're not.
Yeah, and under that self-hatred is there's another layer, and it's just hatred of God.
Yep.
Right? Because we're made in God's image, and if God makes us male and female, to hate yourself is to hate, not because you are God, but it's to hate what God has made you.
Yep.
Underneath all of that is.
Yep. I listened to a documentary called D-Trans that I think Prager University put out, and there's a line that one of the girls says that stuck with me, and it's something I've been kind of thinking and saying out loud before I even heard her say it. But she is somebody who went from, being a young girl, then doing the whole transition thing, identifying as a boy for a while, and then snapping out of it at some point, right? And then going detransitioning. And at one point she says, before I even considered transgenderism, I hated myself and wanted to kill myself. And then when I discovered transgenderism, I realized it's the closest thing I could get to killing myself, which is what I wanted to do, but yet live. Right? And that's what it is. It's self-hatred, but it's being valorized.
Right. So and people's lives are being destroyed.
Yep.
In the process.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, last thing here before we go, because our time is almost up. We've talked about this in the past, but I think it's important to keep coming back to it. Talk about the relationship or the connection between deliverance and judgment. Okay. Because Exodus is a prime example of these two things coming together. And yet there's people who say we just want a God of deliverance, but not a God of judgment. Yeah, but that's problematic, especially in Exodus. So talk about the relationship of those two things in Exodus specifically.
Judgment and deliverance. So, in order for God's people to be set free, God is going to bring judgment. And so you have judgment coming upon the Egyptians, right? But it is also resulting in them being set free. And here's the interesting thing. This is kind of connected to that intersectionality idea. And you brought this up as well on this last Sunday, but the ultimate form of judgment that comes in all the plagues is the judgment against the firstborn, which is the firstborn son, which is the height of all these plagues. Yeah. It is not just attacking, humans. It's attacking the firstborn sons, which were the heirs, which were the representation of the future of a people. You have all these layers to what taking a firstborn son means. But this judgment, when it comes, also the people of Israel are liable to it, right? And so
Yes.
their salvation needs from Egypt must also include their salvation from this judgment God's going to bring upon Egypt in order to free them.
Yeah.
Because, and that's one of the points of the intersectionality thing I wanted to hammer home is that I actually got into the I hate to bring it back a little bit, but I feel like it's connected to this issue. So the reason why I really got into the idea of intersectionality here is because I was engaging with Miroslav Volf on Facebook, and Miroslav Volf had said something to the tune of, the Exodus story reveals that God is a God who is always for the marginalized, always for the oppressed. And I had just been teaching through Exodus with the youth, and I had gotten to this passage in 11 where it says, this final judgment, which is the worst of all of them, right?
Yeah.
Where it counts, where the judgment and plagues counts the most.
Yep.
It's going to come upon Pharaoh who sits on the throne and the slave girl at the handmill, right?
Yeah.
Yep. What that is those are the two, the top and the bottom of the intersectional spectrum, right?
Right.
And
right.
So
you got male, female, rich, poor, ruler, oppressed,
slave. Yeah, exactly. Slave, king. So So if that to me was just prima facie evidence that Wolf is wrong. Like, how could that, if this judgment, which is coming, which is the ultimate judgment in the plagues, also gets the slave girl at the mill, it can't be, the problem can't be oppressor oppressed.
Yeah.
It has to be something deeper, which is what we see with this final judgment that does come, which also saves. It's about sin. It's about, and that's one of the things, like, these plagues are somewhat typological and they're pointing to something, right? Even the fact that God shows up in the midst and not everybody dies, but it's like targeted at the firstborn, is somewhat typological. But it is pointing to the fact that every one of us will face God in his midst.
Yeah.
And judgment has to come in order to free us from that. But somehow we have to be judged and yet not touched by the judgment.
Yeah.
And that's the point of the Passover lamb.
Right.
The Passover lamb is the judgment that comes upon somebody else. The lamb is slain, and the blood is put on the lintels of the doorpost, so that we are freed from the judgment through the judgment.
Through the judgment. Yeah, that's right.
And that's how they're saved. And
there's another issue with the coming back to the intersectionality thing. It's not just when you look at Pharaoh and then the slave girl, or in chapter 12, it's Pharaoh and the guy in the dungeon who's a prisoner, right? Yeah. It's not just that. Because if it was about oppressor and oppressed, then Israel would not have to put blood on the doorpost.
Exactly.
Right? It would just be, oh no, you're the oppressed, you're good to go.
They're self-justified by their oppression.
They're self-justified. That's right.
Yeah.
But they're clearly not, and they clearly need a savior and someone to protect them from judgment.
Yep.
That being the lamb.
Exactly. And that's, so by the way, Miroslav Volf, when I mentioned that aspect, he didn't answer. Stop.
It's weird. You read Free of Charge, didn't you?
Yeah.
I thought Miroslav Volf had
amazing things to say.
Amazing things to say. Yeah. And then it's just heart-wrenching to see these really brilliant minds.
Yeah.
That it seems like they just are untethered from truth.
They've taken a lot of these brilliant minds are in academia, where this social Marxist way of thinking is just everywhere. It's just like, they're just men. They are able to be completely led astray by their surroundings, just like we are.
That's true. So, that's a good word to end on here. Be careful. Yeah. Stick to the truth.
Exactly.
All right. You want to send us out?
Yeah. Everybody, thanks for joining us for Sermon B-Sides. Until next time, trust Christ, go to church, and love your neighbor. Peace.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.